Not in my name, not in my faith, not in my words, not in that way. Not in my name, not in my faith, not in my words, not in that way.
Welcome, viewers, to another edition of A Muslim's Perspective. First, we say praise belongs to Allah. We praise Him, we ask Him for guidance and forgiveness, and we seek protection in Allah from the malice of our own souls and the evil of our actions. Whom Allah guides, no one can lead him astray, and whom He makes astray, no one can lead him back to the right path. I bear witness that there is no other deity but Allah by Himself, no associate to Him. And I bear witness that Muhammad is His servant and messenger. Our guest today is Dave Alexanderson. Assalamu alaikum, Dave.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Viewers, settler colonialism in Canada is that process and the consequences of the progressive colonization of the lands of the indigenous peoples in Canada, already present here at first contact. As colonization progressed, the indigenous peoples or First Nations went through forced displacement, genocide, as well as assimilation. Governments in Canada in many cases ignored or chose to deny the Aboriginal title of the First Nations. The traditional governance of many of the First Nations was replaced with government-imposed structures. Many of the indigenous cultural practices were banned. First Nations people status and rights were less than that of settlers. The impact of colonization on Canada can be seen in its culture, history, politics, laws, and legislatures. The current relationship of the indigenous peoples in Canada and the government is one that which has been heavily defined by the effects of settler colonialism and indigenous resistance. Canadian courts and recent governments have recognized and eliminated some discriminatory practices. As immigrants to Canada, we must at a minimum understand and acknowledge this human tragedy. As people of faith, we are reminded that Allah commands justice and the doing of good in chapter 16, verse 90. And in chapter 4, verse 13, He says, O ye who believe, stand firmly for justice as witnesses to Allah. So today's program, we have with us Dave Alexanderson. Dave is a Cree Aboriginal from James Smith, Saskatchewan, and the father of 5. Dave, can you share with us some background details of the social environment in which you were raised?
I was raised in Saskatchewan, and I am a Cree Aboriginal, and I went through basically what most Aboriginal youth in my era went through. If we were lucky, we weren't in a residential school. In the beginning times, I lived with my mom and my father until my mom was violently assaulted by my father at age 4, where he was sent to jail for 4 years only, and we were put into government care, and that would be what we call foster home. So it's a home where you're sent to live with white people, and at the time, it was either they would send you to residential or to a home, but because I was fortunate to have family within the city limits of Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, where I spent most of my life living, they couldn't put me in any form of residential system. So I had to grow up in the foster care system. I would eventually go back to my mother only for a couple of years, and then I would end up, my mother would unfortunately, due to alcoholism and drug addiction that she experienced as a residential school survivor, who experienced unforetold abuse by the residential schools. Couldn't take care of us children in the little town that we were living in, and the store made the tough decision to have us apprehended by Children's Services, and we were all separated, as me, my brother, and my sister at the time, to live in separate homes, even though that was not supposed to be. It was supposed to be kept together, but we weren't. I was later diagnosed with a condition called fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. It's a condition where if a parent had drank while you were being born, you were born with several, if not many medical conditions over your lifetime. And over the next 7 years, I would go through 57 different foster home placements. I would experience every form of abuse, no different than a residential school: physical, emotional, verbal, sexual, everything that people could think of happened just the same, and still goes on today in foster homes. But I went through this until I was 16 years of age, and that's because of the residential school systems. Because my mother basically, what she went through was residential school systems.
When you say residential school system, can you explain to our viewers what does that, what it meant for a person? It's, were they still with their parents? What
So residential schools were basically a placement where the children were not with their parents. They were sometimes not taken away from their parents without their parents' even notification. And they were taken to a school that was anywhere from 2 to 8 hours away, sometimes even in the next province, where they were basically in a school format of residential. So they would basically be in a building run by different groups on behalf of the Canadian government.
So they were institutionalized, so to speak, away from their natural born parents and the environment, and put into this institution.
Yes.
Hundreds of miles away, hours away from their natural parents.
And from their language, yeah.
And then supposedly socialized and educated in that context.
To be a good white type Christian person, and most of them did not speak English. More than 93% did not speak English. They spoke their native language, Cree, Ojibwe, Anishinaabe. They were beaten for speaking their native language. And we're not talking just your normal beating. We're talking about beatings that could involve death, and this is why you hear about these mass graves that have been found all across Canada, because there was no consequence.
On the compounds of the residential schools.
Because if they were to kill a Native child, we were not considered someone that needed to be recorded.
And apparently that still continues today with so many missing Indigenous women.
Of course, that is still happening today.
Yeah.
There are over 1,500 women that's according to the RCMP database. There are 1,500 women, and killers target Aboriginal women because they know that nobody's going to miss them.
Or to look for them.
Or to look for them, because we're considered the forgotten race in this country. People come to this country and they don't realize that this country was the native country first.
Yeah. So in terms of how you were raised and socialized, as a young man growing up, for example, I remember having aspirations of a career, of going to university, of doing the normal aspirational things that a young person would have. in your youth, what sort of aspirations, any, was encouraged or possible? Did you have any aspirations?
Just to survive to getting into what will happen when I get into the next home, what type of foster home it will be. Small crime was basically your aspiration, because you would run away from foster homes because you learned after a while. Because when I say 57 foster homes, about 20 of them I had recycled through, right? And then the other 37 were totally new. So some you would recycle through, and some were new. And you knew after a while, after about, say, 3 years, I learned to tell abusers right away. And when I realized I was going to be dealing with possibly someone that was going to hurt me, I'd run away. So my aspirations were criminal activity, unfortunately, and alcoholism. I started drinking at the age of 11.
Wow. This alcohol was easy to come by.
It was the easiest thing to get because you could just go into any grocery store, pick up a bottle of mouthwash. They didn't ask you for ID, and for $3 or $2 back then, you could get drunk off a bottle of mouthwash. And
so yeah. Why the impulse to go to alcoholism? It deadened your spirit.
Part of it is because of
pain. It reduced your pain.
To reduce pain, but also because of the condition I was born with. When you're born with fetal alcohol syndrome, you have statistically it's above 70% chance of getting involved with drugs or alcohol. And if you have a non-encouraging environment, it's in the 90%, because that's basically what you were born with. So alcohol and drugs for me were second nature, basically. So, and the people you would meet when you'd run away were other runaways a lot of times. And when you run away and you meet these other people, alcohol was the quickest and most easiest solution to ease the struggle and the pain that you would go through. There was no counseling or addiction services to help us go through what we went through in the foster home. If I told the social worker, hey, that foster home just abused me, they would say, oh yeah, right, you're just making up lies. We were considered to be disbelieved,
Your word wasn't trusted.
Our word was never trusted. And even in today's world, right, I was downtown last year, and there was a guy asking for change, and my friend who had a little bit more money, I said, just give him $5. And he looked at him, and I'm the native, and he just didn't even realize he said it, because he lives downtown Toronto. He's native, he's probably going to go buy some beer. I'm like, that's not for you to decide, that's for Allah to decide, right? If he goes to buy food, right, you don't know that, right? But his first instinct, because he's so used to them in downtown Toronto, is that they're going to go buy alcohol. They're going to go buy drugs. And it's a stereotypic view, and it's a wrong view to have. It's unfortunate,
So, in living in the city, for example, we have all these facilities for education, entertainment, sports, a lot of infrastructure that's built in. Even a walk in the park, so to speak, Canada's Wonderland, and all these magnificent facilities that we have in the cities. Growing up in James settlement or reserve, what other distractions did you have for young people? Any?
Well, the problem that you have with living on the reserve, and why I avoided living on the reserve, was that not only was alcohol and drugs more prevalent, but you were more closed off. So this was why they created the reserve system. It was to isolate us. So when the Indian Reserve Act was created under the Indian Act, that was created so that we live here, white people live here, and until like the 60s, it could be crime for a native to go to Saskatoon, right, or Prince Albert or Melfort.
So it's a form of apartheid.
Basically, that's what the RCMP were there to patrol, to keep us on the reserve. And the reserves, I've always have found, I love my reserve. I love the people. I love everything about it. But alcohol and drugs play too much. You know, I love going to dry reserves. Like I've been to Alaska many times, and I've been to a lot of the dry reserves up there, and they're amazing. They're like people connect back to their roots. They're not buying processed food. They're eating seal. They're eating the caribou, the reindeer. Yeah, you know what they get from mainland.
So in other words, what you're saying to me is that these reserves did not have these sort of facilities that are available in the city areas for youth to be burning their energies, so to speak.
Yeah, it's even to now when you look at what just happened in Saskatchewan,
Yeah.
you know, and
so things like running water. Do you have running water in reserves?
I believe roughly 80% now have it.
Yeah.
And that's only been in the last 10 years, you know, that there's been more initiative put to giving running water, but there's always water boil advisories happening on the reserves, you know.
So essentially, I've never had the opportunity to visit a reserve. So what you're saying to me, it's like basically rudimentary existence, basic existence in these, you know, maybe a warm place to live, to rest your head at night, and that's it?
It all depends though, because each reserve is different.
Yeah.
So it depends on where you're from.
Yeah.
For example, if you go to like, I live near Thunder Bay, in Nisqually there, they have some good programs for youth inside of Thunder Bay and on the reserve.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not, so for the younger kids, they have a lot of programs through Boys and Girls Clubs, and to encourage the youth to do non-drugs or alcohol, and it's wonderful, right? So there are reserves out there that are actively trying to tackle alcoholism and drug addiction. It's just they need more funding. They need more government funding.
Okay, but you speak about reserves being isolated from cities and so on. As a native, as a First Nations person, if you wanted to be an entrepreneur, for example, and open your own business, so to speak, what's the process of doing that? Can you?
From a reserve?
From a reserve.
From a reserve, you can open your own business. They are federally, they are federal land. So like that's the core thing to remember, that all reserves are federally land. So
but do you have to get permission from the Ministry of Indian Affairs to open a business, for example?
No, you'd have to get it to your local chief or your band council.
Yeah.
So it's not that hard to start a business. It's just, for example, where I'm from, you're 45 minutes from a city, and a very small city. It's very hard to start a business and have a high success. You know, shipping and all that. I've known friends who have tried to start their own businesses, their own, you know, native decorations, their own websites. And people will say, oh, the shipping takes too long because it's Canada Post, usually it ships from there. You know, FedEx, UPS,
They don't service the reserves.
some regions they don't, no.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're stuck with Canada Post. And
so in other words, structurally, there is very little resources available for, let's say, DIY, do-it-yourself, or self-help for an ambitious young man or woman living in a reserve. Would you say that?
On their own?
On their own.
Yeah, it's harder. Yeah, it is harder. They would have to look into the city. They would have to go to Like, for example, where I'm from, you'd have to go to like Melfort or Saskatoon to look for whatever programs are available at Indian Affairs and apply through their programs, and then go on their waiting list for any business related type programs that might be available. And those could take years, because even for myself, I applied for, I wanted to run my own computer shop, and so I applied through a native grant program where you get a loan, right? And I got approved, and I was excited. And then they said, okay, just go to TD here. And then they say, okay, so in 5 years' time, you don't pay this back, right? Then you pay 18%. So it's like, they're going to give me the money, but at the same time, they're going to charge me 18% if I don't pay it within that certain time limit. It's no different from you going to what's it called, to any Canadian bank and getting a loan. They're going to charge you interest rates, but
It wouldn't be 18%.
yeah, it'd be probably a lot less.
Probably. But
Yeah.
again, it depends on the time when that application was made, because back in the 80s, interest rates was quite high. 20%, 18% would have been reasonable.
Wow.
So as somebody who just landed as a resident in Canada, you have all these opportunities to open a business, to go to school, to find a job. But you're saying that the typical young male or female First Nations person do not typically have these avenues open to them.
Not as easy as someone that's just new to this country. We want to welcome 500,000 new Canadians, which is great. But what about the 1.2 million natives that need counseling, that need job programs, anti-crime programs?
I guess, it's a tremendous question to ask.
Police programs. The fact that I come from a region where it's like a 30-minute wait time for a police officer to come to your door.
Yeah. Dave, we'll take a short break and continue momentarily.
Okay.
Until then, viewers, be back shortly. Peace out.
Not in my faith, not in my words, not in that way.
Welcome back, viewers. We are with Dave Alexanderson, and we are speaking about the plight of First Nations people in Canada. Dave, at what point did you get to know about Allah and His Messenger? And can you give us that, background, how you became a Muslim and when you became a Muslim and so on?
So basically what happened was, in my early 20s, I had battled drug addiction. It was cocaine, heroin, and I was living in Vancouver at the time. And one day I was in a back alley and I saw this older lady, looked about 45, and she was trying to get a needle in her arm, and a native girl, right? And I just asked her how old she was. And here I am, I think she's my age roughly, or a little bit older. Older, like maybe 35, 40, right? And she told me she was 20, but she looked like she was 40. That's what years of drug use since she was 10 years old had done to her. And when I saw that kind of gave me a woke. And so I went to the Christian organization and said, I want to get out of here. I want to go to Toronto. Can you get me on a bus out of here, please? And so I went to Toronto. And over the next few years, I would battle my alcoholism. I would end up in a motor vehicle accident. I would end up in a motorized wheelchair, and require it to basically get around. And I basically was a father of a young boy, and I started to question faith in 2007 when I was living in Thunder Bay, and I had read a book on the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam by Martin Lings, and that really kind of was the opening for me, because I really said, wow, look what this man went through, and look what people put him through. And he never once said, let's go get revenge. They're oppressing us. We're here dying and struggling. Well, they've basically banned us from coming into the land. Let's go revenge or something. No, instead it was peace. And even when they were allowed back into the city, they would share their food with the less fortunate first, not themselves. And for me, that really connected to me, the humbleness of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And it was in
Who
this.
handed you that book, by the way? How did you come across that book?
Through, believe it or not, guys on the street giving dawah downtown Toronto, just handing out books, and that was one of the books. And I was just happened to be heading back to living in Thunder Bay, and it wouldn't until be December of 2007 that I would actually literally sit there and contemplate. I was drinking about 30 to 40 alcohol beer a day, and I was a single father at the time, and I felt bad. I felt not good about myself. I felt like I was becoming a self-fulfilling, prophecy of my people. But here again, I was stuck in this wheelchair, and I watched The Purpose of Life by Khalid Yassin. And he said in that message, even if you don't believe in Allah totally, ask of him in that message. So I just asked with all his might, get me out of this wheelchair. I don't want to be in this wheelchair. I'm tired of this life. I'm tired of this. I don't want to drink. Stop me from drinking. And nothing happened. So I said, oh, see, God doesn't care about me. And it wouldn't be until 5 months later where I would basically, over 3 months period of time, right, over my physiotherapy, I was getting better. And I didn't put one and one together at all. Instead, it encouraged me to drink more alcohol. And I was ending up in the hospital by March of 2008. I was in the hospital 3 times for alcohol poisoning, because now I was just using crutches, like a stroller, right? I was no longer using a wheelchair, which was really amazing. And that should have been my sign right there that Allah had facilitated this for me. But no, I took advantage of it. I could go to bars now, I could drink, I could party, but then I was leaving my son. So in May, Children's Aid came to my door and said that we know you've been back to heavy drinking, and that the caseworker is going to come and most likely apprehend your son tomorrow or the following day, unless you're going to give us some form of timeline on how you're going to fix yourself. We don't want to take him away. Mm-hmm. Right? And I contemplated that night, and I thought, I grew up in government care. I could never imagine what my mother thought while I was in government care. So that night I thought the best thing I could do was just take a whole bunch of pills and end my life. And I had a whole bunch of pills. It was 11:14, and I was ready just to take a whole bunch of mixed drugs that would have killed me with the amount of alcohol that I had in me. And my son came out and he said, "Dad, I love you." And everything just started breaking down for the next 45 minutes. I started just drinking, and then literally like 10 to midnight, I just started thinking like all about my life and that, you know, am I really going to leave my son to not have his father around? You know, but how am I going to change? I'm never going to change. I'm born with fetal alcohol syndrome. I'm born to be an alcoholic, and I was a habitual alcoholic, which means you just can't up and quit drinking, and you have to wean yourself off. And I just started remembering the Chaldean lecture, and I started remembering the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu book from Martin Lings and his humbleness, his carrotiness. And literally at 12:01, I literally just looked up Islam, convert to Islam, Toronto. And at the time, there was an organization called Paradise Forever, or P4E. Mm-hmm. And I spoke to a brother named Muhammad Robert Heff at 12:04.
He's from Scarborough.
Yeah, and I took my Shahada. And I instantly became sober. And I felt a clarity that I had never felt in my life. And when I mean my whole life, I felt like I lived in a hallway where all the doors were locked. Every single door I ever tried in my life, locked door, locked door, locked door. And literally, upon saying, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, as I felt that all those doors just burst open. And I just felt this relief. And I literally went cold turkey, and it was against doctor's advice. I was risking, because I have a heart condition, so it was risk a heart attack. But I was living in the edge of Mississauga in Etobicoke, and my son was going to school in Etobicoke, and I was going all the way to Islamic Foundation every day, going to P4 where they were located in Scarborough by Disability Transit. And I would sit in the mosque from 9 in the morning till basically 1:45-ish, then go all the way back, pick up my son, and then go all the way back, get there at 5 o'clock, and then stay there at the mosque till 10 and do this all over for 40 days. And when I was sick, I was sick. It was the ultimate test of a lifetime. And it was eye-opening, and it was the best decision that I ever made in my life.
And were there people around to support you during this time?
Yes. At the time, Muhammad Robert Heft, if he didn't have that little Paradise Forever Center, right? And he does still have it, but it's not like it used to be. It used to have activities and programs for kids and stuff like that. I wish there were more programs like that, actively targeting converts, because can you imagine without what, you know, the steps that they were just closing up from a night program, and he heard the phone ring and he answered the phone, you know, and I redid my Shahada the following week later at a mosque, you know, because I was drunk, so I did become instantly sober, but I wanted to make sure. So, but it just changed my whole aspect of life, because it gave me a better understanding. You know, I have arthritis, I have a liver condition, I have a heart condition, but alhamdulillah, I'm happy. I know that for every struggle that it's a blessing too. You know, and these are all because of what happened to me being born, and it never would have happened if residential school systems never would have happened. You know, if I was raised in a traditional Native way, you know, I would never have been exposed to alcoholism.
Allah. So, Dave, recently your home nation, the James Smith Cree Nation, experienced a tragedy of mass murder back in September of this year.
Yes.
How did the inequitable conditions of First Nations contribute to this event?
The lack of support that is not, like, there is support, but there's not enough. There's not enough in terms of, counseling.
You mentioned earlier that some geographic area you only had like 4 policemen or something. Can you?
Yeah, the RCMP, they have one detachment that covers a big, huge square area like the size of Toronto, and they have like 4 officers that cover that area. And if you have, like, I have a friend who lives on a reserve just right next to our reserve, and she experienced a domestic violence, and it took them 45 minutes to get to her, right? 2 officers, right? 45 minutes, right? And by that time, the perpetrator was gone, and they're like, oh, you could have called us and told us that he was gone already. And she's like, no, I want to file charges. They're like, oh, okay. And they seem like it was a struggle for them to have to do all this. You know what I mean? And this is why, there's a call to have Native police on Native land in Saskatchewan, which could probably take another 10 years before that will even happen. And that incident, when it happened, right, it turned into such a mass event because of the lack of policing, because of the lack of a system in play to encourage more programs, and more protection for, I guess you could say, for adults. And what I mean in terms of that are criminal, what I mean by that is proper counseling, proper support. People that commit crimes like that just don't commit crimes like that. And,
That's not overnight.
That's not overnight. 50-something charges he had, right? Where was counseling? Where was support? Where was mental health services provided for this person? For his victims, and it's a revolving door for the jail system. I grew up as a youth with the criminal past, and I'm telling you, it literally is a revolving door. I would get charged with a crime, and there would be no counseling, there would be no therapy. It would be like, you go do your 3 months, get out, and back out. You're doing crime for another 3-4 months, then you're back in jail for 3 months, and it's just, where's the intervention?
It's almost like you're a throwaway person.
Yeah, that we're not seeing, and because we're not seeing, right, it's not an issue.
So
right?
You're saying there is a lack of justice for First Nations, and there's a lack of equity in treatment for First Nations peoples.
Of course, look at the Nova Scotia shooting. They're having like a multi-million-dollar inquiry right now. And what color?
I mean, with the guy who said he's a RCMP or something.
Yeah, they're spending millions of dollars in a big national inquiry, right?
What went wrong?
And what went wrong? And where's our inquiry? There hasn't been any word. He died in custody, right? They said of an overdose, but they don't need to release the autopsy because it's not, it's a private matter. But still, all this should be investigated. But we know that if it is investigated, it's just going to go back to the root of it all, which is residential schools. And most people that come to this country have no idea what a residential school is. These were homes where our ancestors were forced to live in. And if they ran away, they most likely died because they were in the middle of nowhere, far away from their home, far away from their places and from their loved ones. and their bodies were just found, buried, and left to forget. And when they would go back home in the summer, parents would ask questions. Where's my loved one? We don't have to answer that.
How has your experience as a Muslim impacted you in your situation? Has it improved your outlook on life? Has it improved the quality of your human experience?
It's improved a lot because, like in 2010, I started Dawah to the North, facebook.com/Dawah to the North, and that is just basically forwarding the message, sending copies of the Quran, being Muslim by Asad Tarsim, and the Prophet Muhammad by the author we just talked about earlier, sending books throughout North America to people to get the message out. Because, believe it or not, getting someone a book out can change their world. I've had people like me who were on the brink of suicide, are on the brink of, not knowing what to do with their life, and just receiving a copy of the Quran changed their life. Or, believe it or not, someone paying attention to them in a soup kitchen. Like, I know a Muslim brother in Calgary who volunteers at a soup kitchen with a couple other Muslim brothers. Jalabia, kufis, everything, right? And one of the brothers that I know that converted to Islam 5 years ago was because of these brothers. He always saw them smiling with their beards, and he didn't have a good experience with religion because of the residential school, and he wanted to give him a piece of his mind, and they were all nice to him, and he couldn't have said, "Why are you guys being nice to me and I'm being rude to you?" He says, "Because the Prophet Muhammad taught us to smile and to be kind to our neighbors, to help our neighbors," right? And he ended up becoming a Muslim, and he actually helps do our distribution for our books to make sure that they get shipped out through Amazon. And since I've become Muslim, people like Muhammad Abrahaf, people like many other friends, like a very good friend, Sheikh Faraz Rabbani, and a few other sheikhs, and have just always kept my deen, my spirit intact, because it's amazing when you feel close to Allah, even though you may have a list of medical conditions, even though it's hard for you to get up every day, but then you remember on how great Islam is, and how great this ummah is, and that there are people out there that are always wondering how you're doing, always checking up on you, And before Islam, I never had that. I never had people check up on me, and it's
okay for the average viewer outside there who has no connections with First Nations people. How would you recommend that they assist, if they can, to improve the quality of life for First Nations people? I mean, it should not only be a government task. We as beneficiaries of this land should learn to give back, and it's particularly to the First Nations. How would you recommend that they go about doing that?
One of the best way I've always tell people is, believe it or not, is volunteering through soup kitchens, through Native organizations, just being an ambassador as yourself. That is one great way. A second great way is actively supporting, Aboriginal food banks that are in the region, right? And third, educate yourself. Learn about the residential schools. There's lots of places, there's lots of reserves outside this area that teach groups of people about residential schools, that will teach you about the native way of their people, because again, there are more than 40 or 50 different languages spoken across Canada. You know, you have a Niswabe, Cree, Mohawk. In this area alone, you have about 17 different languages within about 3 hours drive. And there are many reserves that you can call and say, you know, we want to learn more about the Native people. We're new to Canada. We want to understand about the culture of Native. Do you have any days that are available? Or do you have any what we call powwows? Those are days where it's a Native celebration where Natives get together and they do traditional Native dancing, and you see the Natives in their doing traditional Native events, especially in the summer, you know. And there are a lot of places in Ontario, especially, that you can learn about Native people, you know. And there's even programs that there is a Muslim organization. I will find it for you and give you the name. But this brother works with an Aboriginal organization in Manitoba, and they kind of bridge together interfaith, right? Like talk with each other. Mm-hmm. And I would have to get all the information for you. But again, the main thing is learning about the people that you have come to this wonderful country of Canada, the first people of this country, learning, donating to their food banks to help feed these people. You know, we're roughly, most people are paying 90%-ish for rent, and you know, it's hard times right now. And third, find places to volunteer. If you're a woman, especially, Native shelters are always looking for. I know one lady, she was always looking for women to volunteer at a shelter, mm-hmm. you know, for night staff, you know. Those are things I think that people that can do, that can, just being an ambassador as yourself, as a Muslim, is in itself is the key thing, I think, mm-hmm. you know. But learning is, I believe, is the most important thing out of all.
Once you become aware of it, then you can
let other people know.
Yeah, and you can also contribute, because now you know the areas of need.
Yeah.
Inshallah. Dave, I'd like to really, really thank you for taking this time out. I know you're not very well.
That's okay.
To share your story and to inform me, firstly, and our viewers about the conditions of First Nations through your voice. And I hope it impacts on our communities, and they can respond to the call that you've made today.
No problem.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Until next time, viewers, peace out.
Not in my name, not